You are watching Econoom TV, the unofficial broadcaster of economics for South African students. In today's episode, it's still chapter 7 and we are looking at demand, supply and prices. This is part 3 of 4 and we will focus on supply. From the circular flow of economic activity, you will recall that the firms employ the factors of production, labor, capital and natural resources, and use it to produce goods and services. Those goods and services are then offered on the market for goods and services. This supply can be described as follows. It's about the quantities of a product or service that firms plan to sell during a specific period at different prices. The key is this part, plan to sell. It is not the final amount that is traded, but only what the firms are offering at different prices. There's a positive relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. The textbook example is of tomatoes, and in this case Johnny Ramos is the individual supplier of tomatoes. The law of supply describes the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied. It says that when the price increases, the quantity supplied will also increase, ceteris paribus. And you'll recall that means that all the other possible influences on supply is kept constant. We are only considering the relationship between price and quantity supplied, and in this case it's a positive one. We can show this relationship in a supply schedule and with a graph. The supply schedule on the left shows the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied, and this positive relationship described by the law of supply. As the price of tomatoes per kilogram goes up, the quantity supplied also increase. These different combinations of price and quantity supplied can then be plotted to draw the supply curve. As you can see over here, at a price of 2 Rand a kilo, the quantity supplied is 1,000 kilograms, and that forms one of the points on the supply curve. As the price goes up to 4 Rands a kilo, the quantity supplied increases to 2,000 kilos, and that's another point on the supply curve. Together, you get this positive slope. A change in the price leads to a movement along the supply curve. Let's say that the price of tomatoes would increase from 3 Rands a kilo to 4 Rands. The result would be an increase in the quantity supplied from 1,500 kilos to 2,000. This is a movement along the supply curve and can only be caused by a change in price. Often we are interested in more than just the individual supply curve and want to consider the market supply. This shows the relationship between the price and the quantity supplied by all the firms over a specific period. It is simply a summation of the quantity supplied at each price. We already know there's a positive relationship between the quantity supplied and the price, but what factors influence the whole supply curve and leads to a shift of the whole curve to the left or the right? There are quite a few, and we'll quickly look at each of them. First, there's the influence of substitutes in production. This is the case of, say, for example, maize and sunflowers. Farmers need to decide how much maize and how much sunflowers they want to plant, and they only have that much land available to do it. So if we put the market for maize over here with a supply curve, and there's some initial combination of price and quantity supplied. Let's then say that there's an increase in the price of maize for some or other reason. The result would be an increase in the quantity supplied. Now typically, if farmers want to supply a greater quantity of maize, that means that they will have less land available for sunflowers, and the whole supply curve for sunflowers will move to the left. Less sunflowers will be supplied at every price. The case of joint products or byproducts in production is a different one. This would be the example of beef and the hides used to make leather products. For example, if you have here at the top the market for beef and some supply curve with an initial combination of price and quantity supplied, and there is an increase in the price of beef. That means that farmers would like to increase the quantity supplied as well. The result is that more cattle will be slaughtered in order to increase the supply of beef, and the result is that there will also be more hides available for making leather products. The whole supply curve of hides will move to the right, and more hides will be supplied at every price. The prices of inputs also have an important influence on the supply curve. If prices of inputs should go up, for example, labor or capital or natural resources become more expensive, this increases the cost of production and reduces the supply. The result is that the whole supply curve will move towards the left, and less of the product will be supplied at every price. New technology or improvements in production techniques also has an influence on the supply curve. This typically lowers the cost of production and results in an expansion of the supply of a particular product. It causes the whole supply curve to move to the right, and more of the product will be supplied at every price. In addition, the government can also have an influence on the supply curve through subsidies and taxes. If the government decides to pay subsidies to producers, it reduces their cost, and this means that there's an expansion in the quantity supplied. The whole supply curve will in fact move to the right as subsidies lowers cost and more is supplied at every price. Taxes have the opposite effect. It adds to the cost of production, and this reduces the supply, moving the supply curve to the left, and less of this taxed good will be supplied at every price. And then natural disasters can also have an impact on the supply. If there's a major flood, a fire or an earthquake, it limits production for some time, and the result is that less is supplied at every price. The whole supply curve moves to the left in response to a natural disaster. It's possible to also express the supply curve in terms of an equation. In this case, the price is indicated by P and the quantity supplied over here by QS. The slope of the supply curve is given by D, and that is the change in price divided by the change in the quantity. The intercept of the supply curve is given by C. You'll note that there is a positive relationship between the price and the quantity supplied as dictated by the law of supply. Finally, we can have a look at a few examples. Let's say that a new tax is levied on the production of cigarettes. What will be the influence on the supply of cigarettes? If we put up our axes over here, price and quantity, and a supply curve with an initial combination of price and quantity supplied. If a tax is levied on production, that pushes up the cost of production and reduces the supply. The whole supply curve will move to the left, and less cigarettes will be supplied at every price. If government decides to give a subsidy to the production of tractors, what would be the influence on the supply of tractors? It's the opposite effect. The subsidy will typically reduce the cost of production, and the result is an expansion of production with the supply curve moving to the right. More tractors will be produced at every price. What if there were floods in the Free State Province? What will happen to the supply of maize? We saw in the previous slide, floods or natural disasters of any kind limits production, and the result is that the supply curve moves to the left. So did we achieve the outcomes of this section? Can you describe the individual supply curve? Can you draw supply curves from a supply schedule or from an equation? Can you discuss the determinants of supply and illustrate the effect of changes in these determinants on the supply curve? You can also have a look at Chapter 7 in Woord en Fourie, and there are additional resources available on Efundi. Answer the quiz questions, and finally, follow @Econoom on Twitter.